Enjoy a seat at the table and good company, where great conversations and meaningful discussions happen.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Beetleholtz, a conversationalist. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussions. And Good Company creates a way to capture smart and important conversations as they happen. I am pleased to be in the company of Heather Presley-Cowen, who is the CEO of Capital Enhancement and Development Services. And you're also well known as a housing and community development strategist. Welcome.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so I want to dive right in because this is a big topic and something that there's a lot to cover. So I want to just lay it out on the table, the issues with affordable housing. So first of all, why is housing such a big issue in this country?
I think it's mainly because affordable housing is kind of seen as what's affordable to you or affordable to me, typically. And when you talk about the term affordable housing, it's about making sure that everyone has a roof over their heads in the country. And so every community is struggling with that as the economy gets better. That's a great thing, but it often means that there are people that get unhoused because they can no longer afford to live there.
Well, but the whole thing is that some people would say that affordable housing, that people don't have houses because there's not enough housing stock,
right?
Which isn't true, because according to Pew Research in this country, the population has only increased by 40.1%. Housing stock has increased from 56%. So in 1980, there were 88 million units of housing. But in 2017, there was 137 million units of housing. So it's not because we don't have enough housing. So what is it that you think is is it the difficulty because of that lower income people are forced out of the housing market because developers only want to build high rent units? Is it because the decade of foreclosure? That people then can't, then their market, what is it that is really creating this problem?
I mean, this idea of supply and demand is pretty well known, right? And so if we see that we've got an overabundance of stock, but yet prices are still rising, my question is, what's the quality of the stock? So we might have more than enough stock, but not all of that stock is marketable. It's not current, it's not useful, it's not relevant to today's family, and therefore it sits on the street, and it's really, in most cases, literally absorbing our tax dollars because it should be removed, replaced, and oftentimes communities, really progressive communities, look for ways to actually maintain it while it's sitting there, so we could preserve it. And if we can't preserve it, we need to replace it. But infill is hard and it costs a lot of money.
Right.
And oftentimes there is a development gap that says it costs more to build it than it'll be worth when it's built. So the supply and demand issue goes on and on.
Right. But the true definition of affordable housing is housing units that are affordable by a section of society whose income is below the median household income. But the other problem is that for every 100 extremely low income households, there's only 29 affordable local units available. And that's because, truthfully, developers want to build rental properties and properties that are really to the high-end rents because, in 2015, the number of apartments with $2,400 plus rent in this country increased by 111%. But new units for in 2015 with under $400 in rent was negative 6%.
Right. So if you own a company and you can sell a product for $2,400 or $2,800, or you could produce it and get $400 for it. Which one are you going to produce, right? But we know in Indiana, we really fall somewhere in the middle of that anyway. We are sort of like that stable old ship. It's been described as that, we don't have the boom or the bust. But at the same time, that stable environment means when I invest in a home in Fort Wayne and I'm able to let's say I find an affordable unit. I'm a buyer. It's not even a developer in this case. the chances of me being able to invest in that and actually make a big return on my investment when I move doesn't happen here. So what we do have, though, are relatively stable prices and values. So developers around here aren't building $2,400 a month units. They're actually probably, if they're building the higher end, they're half that.
Well, no, but now I think part of the issue is that if you look at the rental that they're building in downtown,
yes,
they are building. So I think that the average rent in Fort Wayne is between $400 and $600 a month. But if you look at what they're building downtown, they are building rental to the higher end of the markets, which is also going to skew this whole idea that rent is affordable here.
So one of the first development projects to happen in downtown, and this is after, let's say, probably, let's say in the last 20 years, Randall Lofts was a really important development project. It was one of the first, and it is affordable, and it leased up immediately.
And you did that through your work as the Deputy Director of Community Development.
Right. Yep.
Now, the Randall Lofts was done, and it was affordable housing. But doesn't it have to be that in order to get the tax abatements or whatever, that they only have to be affordable for a certain number of years, and then they can turn it back to?
Yeah, so the rental housing tax credit program, it rewards a developer for creating affordable housing. And yes, but it's like, 15 to 30 years.
Okay.
So it's not a short amount of time. And in that particular case, this is how different our market is today than it was back then.
Okay.
It was some of the first affordable units in downtown. It was some of the first new units in downtown in that era. And what we did was actually to spend additional dollars so that the developer would put in market rate units. So we incentivized market rate units in Randall Lofts.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Like, I know in her second property, which is where I live,
that
the
was
Superior
what built
Lofts.
That was the test. So those units that were market rate units actually leased up so fast they had a waiting list, and it helped to give the developer the assurance that if she did another one, she'd have enough people. So we did that on purpose. But back then, we couldn't tell that there was really, we had a market potential analysis that said, if you build it, yes, they will come.
Right.
But we tested it at Randall Lofts.
But in the Superior Lofts, because the rents are so much higher, the people who are actually living there are actually not people from Fort Wayne. They're people like me who moved here from another place, or you're here temporarily by your company, or they're empty nesters.
Yes.
We don't have no one, I think, is someone from Fort, or they temporarily live there and then they're going to buy a house, but they came from somewhere else. So it's not...
about 70% of the people looking to buy or rent in this region are millennials. They're younger singles and couples. They are young families.
Right.
So if we aren't looking now at doing more affordable housing, because when we look at millennials they're buying it when they're buying online. They're willing to buy a house without going to see it.
Yep.
Yeah. And the other thing we know about them is that they do like downtowns, and they do want to be even post-COVID. There's still a demand for that.
No. I've always lived in major cities, and I've always lived downtown because I like the diversity. I like that I can walk places. I can take out the car. I don't have to take out the car. I can take advantage of libraries and things, which what you find is, and we were talking about this earlier, was the idea that when you build these housing developments, even I have issues with it, be it at the high end or at the low end.
Yeah.
They build them as almost as islands unto themselves. So you have to get in your car to go anywhere. Yeah. So I understand for the higher end, they want it protected. But what I don't understand is, like, when you look at even new developments, and you've seen the plans that they've talked about, and 2 have been approved for Southeast Fort Wayne.
Right.
All they are is just massive buildings or townhouses and things with roads, but there's no mixed use. There's no, we keep talking about food deserts or not having services. Well, if you don't create places where business can happen, where you're going to have all these residents, then are we really creating a vibrant economic business that will be viable both for housing and business? Or are we really just creating a ghetto to put poor people in?
It is the incentives around affordable housing give developers a reason to only want to build affordable units. So it's a matter of the financing scheme. But then why are they using rental housing tax credits, for instance? Well, it's because the market is not stable enough, let's say, that if I have to charge lower rents, then I'm going to need somewhere to make that up in the pro forma. And they're not making some huge amount of profit that somebody else wouldn't make. So the profits are controlled, and the developments are built around those financing schemes. And like I say, if the financing tool says the more affordable units you put into that deal, the more equity you're going to have poured in, or opportunities for equity, that's what you're going to get. But
then explain to me, because I don't understand, when you look at all of these big real estate developer moguls, including the Kushners and Trump and Trump's father, they all made their money initially in building affordable housing. So how does this work? Is it because, how are they able to make money if there's a limited, because of the tax credits, and how does this all work?
Well, what I can speak to, I don't know about those individuals specifically, but I do work with a lot of developers that do this. And what I know is, in the instance of Randall Lofts, when you have a developer who's willing to collaborate and partner with you. So I was with the city at that point. We had a partner in Real America. And to this day, I would still say Rhonda Shrewsbury-Waybright, wonderful firm.
She's very visionary. She's now working on creating middle level in expense assisted living and independent living. Because there's either
and they have gorgeous products.
Yeah.
Okay, so when you come together, and I'm talking a true private-public partnership where you have the local units of government, the foundations, the developers, the EDCs, the economic development corporations, when you put that kind of a three-legged stool together, the public, the private, the nonprofit, maybe being that third leg, you get some really magical things that come out. But when a developer is just looking for a piece of land to go build, and there's not a real relationship with that developer in the community, you're probably going to get whatever the source, the financing source, in this case, rental housing tax credits, whatever they tell that developer to build. So it's important that communities really plan for, and stand for what they really want to see, and then provide incentives. Have a relational conversation, have relationships with your developers so that they know what you want.
Right.
Because they do want to bring it most of the time.
And you serve as this intermediary between all of these constituents, from the public officials to the foundations to the developers, and you sort of oversee these public-private partnerships. Is that a unique type of career or area of expertise that you created, or is this something that you would see like in cities across the country?
Yeah, I would like to believe that there are a lot of people that do this. They just don't maybe call themselves that.
Okay.
I would say I'm a harmonizer. I don't oversee it, but I do, if I can see an opportunity to collaborate, I like to put people together.
And so let's talk through one of the very successful ones you did, which is the Bottleworks Lofts project. And that was a perfect, now explain to me a little bit as you can, because it was complicated, how that came together and how that demonstrates bringing all these partners together.
It was a great project. It's gorgeous, but it wasn't perfect. You're exactly right. So the developer came to me to talk about this idea. They wanted to do this development project, but I also knew that, and the city, just so you know, the city had done a major initiative to go in and plan for 36 block, 67 acre area called Hannah Creighton. At the time, we called it Renaissance Point. Collaborated with the neighborhood. As part of that, we were buying property. We owned a lot of land over there, and this was a building. Where Bottleworks Lofts is in the old Coke building, we called it.
Right, it was a Coca-Cola plant, right?
Bottling plant. Yeah. And so it was owned by a private company, and we bought it from them. They were wanting to move. So we own this building. A developer comes and says, hey, we're interested in developing it. Now, they were the third developer we talked to. But my first inclination was, since it's getting serious, let's get a nonprofit from the neighborhood involved. Denise Andorfer over at Vincent Village was right up for the task. She's amazing. And
well, because Vincent Village is also in the housing market. I mean, they help people.
They are the epicenter of the neighborhood that's just across the street on Pontiac,
right,
off of Pontiac. And Vincent Village has done amazing things in terms of taking and buying houses around a main house and building out the neighborhood from there. They are housing plus services, the whole package.
And on a smaller level, that's sort of what Javier Mondragon has been able to do in the Mount Vernon Park, where it wasn't a large development, but he's been doing it around the Bridges of Grace with the standalone housing there. So it can be done on a large level or a small level. But looking at the bottleworks, so Vincent Village said, okay, yeah, this would help us because we need more housing for our
people
clients
that are graduating out of our programs.
Right.
So we get the developer together with the nonprofit and help them to forge a relationship that would ultimately create BottleWorks Lofts. And I have to say, it was Denise's leadership that really led that project to success.
And then how does it work then that Vincent Village gets, a steady recul of income? How does that work?
That's the imperfect part of that particular project. But when a nonprofit collaborates with a for-profit developer, and the state's program in Indiana allows that co-developer, the nonprofit, to actually earn a portion of the developer fee. One of the lessons learned from that particular project was maybe it would have been a good idea to have had a little bit more work on the side of the nonprofit to help negotiate that deal. No one walked away, in a bad position. But what I would say is, in hindsight, this could have been an even better example if we had fully done that. That said, Vincent Village has been an amazing partner to BottleWorks Lofts. It set up property management around it. It provides services. It's a place where its residents can then go and live. So there is a really symbiotic relationship there. And Miller Valentine did a great job. It's beautiful.
And then, the biggest project that is really this public-private and sort of looking at, with housing is the Electric Works project. But one of the interesting things that I think that about Electric Works is not the fact that it's taking over the old GE plant. Yeah, that's a great use. But this whole idea of taking a look at the procurement patterns and the uses of minority-owned, veteran-owned, and women-owned business enterprises. So it's really something behind the cosmetic of what Electric Works is going to look like. So explain that a little bit and how that sort of created a different look and relationship.
Well, it's interesting because I had been asked by a local nonprofit to help them put together a workforce development program. And my background...
That's Jacob's hand?
Joshua's hands,
yeah.
And, Prophet Walker and his team there, just a stellar group of people trying to put together this really interesting workforce development idea. And so what we did was sort of combined the tools of the federal government that I was familiar with, Section 3 and women-owned, minority-owned, veteran-owned business cultivation, and we really worked to try to put that together for their program. Well, in the process, they were approached by Electric Works, and what a great project. So my work flashed forward to today. That the Joshua Works program is up and going. It's not necessarily tied to Electric Works, but I'm able to work with Larry Wygand and his team to work on the inside because the ownership put out this bold goal of we want to hit 15% XBE participation,
which are the minority-owned, veteran-owned, and women-owned business enterprises having contracts to do some of the work or different aspects of this project.
Yes, and why am I passionate about this? Well, when working for Mayor Henry, we did this really interesting study, availability and utilization study, and we learned that our XBEs locally are woefully underutilized. So let's say 5% might be great. So for the ownership of the development project to say, we know this, they know that it's hard to even get 5%. Right. We're going to go for 15, and there's no federal funding source telling us we we have to do this. I couldn't help but want to be involved, obviously. But what you have to do is then get into the inner workings of the process you use to go find and get engaged with those contractors.
Well, there's not only the fact that then they have to become certified, right?
No.
Oh, but there's also the idea that a lot of them, the idea of how they're assessed, they're not necessarily valued, like a smaller, business, is it going to be able to deliver? So you've also put into place some performance metrics, right? And you're going to measure how this actually works and if it really does deliver and what you can best practices from it, correct?
Absolutely. We should have some long-term key performance indicators, as in new relationships built that go beyond electric works. If I can really make a mean pancake and all of a sudden somebody shows up, the IHOPs of the world and says, hey, can you produce pancakes for all of our IHOPs throughout, Allen County? I'd say, well, I can make mean pancakes, but I would need to add a lot of staff and I'm going to need some equipment. All those things. And what Electric Works is saying is, look, tell us what you need, and we're going to help to figure out how to make this happen.
So it's sort of like what, Whole Foods used to do, or in some ways now, Walmart is doing for when they find a local product and they realize they don't have the chance to develop in the factories and stuff, that they're now working with them to help them do it.
That's right.
So, but I think it's going to be very interesting. But there are also, when we look at affordable housing, some of the things I think that people are doing, the tried and true and sort of what's been proven and sort of what the government has sort of set up. But there are some interesting, innovative endeavors in sort of looking at this. And I think that also what people need to think about when they think about affordable housing, it's not just for low income.
That's right.
Because you have artists, for instance, or people who are in the gig society or entrepreneurs that they a lot of times make a lot less than they live in poverty. I joked when I was started my first company in New York City, I was probably the best educated person who could qualify for welfare and food stamps, because when I quit my job, I didn't have anything. So you have programs like the Second Lofts in Decatur, who they created the more affordable lofts for artists. Right. And then you also have this idea of community land trusts, where people are being able, where the community then decides, and that makes it easier.
When you reduce the cost of construction to just the cost to construct, the property, the land itself then is not a factor. And so land trust can be really helpful.
Right.
And, I think what you're making is an interesting point. The question really becomes, what comes into your mind when I say low income? Right? And so when I go into communities and we talk about affordable housing, what comes into your mind when I say affordable housing? And I actually have slides on this. I say the same thing about rural housing. If I said rural housing, what do you think of? Or rural downtown?
Right.
And the pictures I have are literally off Google. It's a vacant downtown.
Right.
And
with a big tumbleweed.
Right. And rural communities are like, wow. But if I say an urban downtown, lots of people out having lunch and dinner.
But 20 years ago, that was not what people thought of urban downtowns.
Right. It was the same thing when we talk about what do you think of affordable housing. So the point is, I think, what comes into our mind when we think about those words affects a lot about what is actually going to be built. If we're building for those people, and instead of me saying, well, my daughter actually falls into that income range.
Right.
If I think about my daughter, I do it with love. If I think about those people, I just don't.
Right.
And so, when we start to put love into it, everything changes.
Well, and I think also, one of the things also that we have to look at in housing in general, but I also think we have to look at how this is going to impact the affordable housing market, is the impact of COVID. Right. So the first issue is that nobody is going to want to go into a nursing home facility, or no way. Until they figure that out. Right. So because of the fact that we have a very large, rapidly growing, aging population, so this whole idea of multi-generational housing, or the idea of people who need, a granny flat or an in-law suite, we're not building housing like that. We need to think about.
We have to plan for it. We do. We have to plan for it, and we have amazing planners, and in this community. community. And that's the real beauty of it. I had the pleasure of being on a panel that the Allen County commissioners put together not too long ago. And we did get into that conversation of density. And could we build homes that allow us to have more than one home on a lot? Well, you start to say
those are the multi-level ones, like you see where you have your apartment, like, and then like my mother grew up, they lived in one and the grandparents lived in the other, or you had a rental, so then you had income.
That's exactly what I'm talking about. And I would say it's an owner-occupied rental.
Right.
So you want owner occupancy because if we really want to stay rooted in home ownership, which we definitely have strong home ownership, that's one way to do it. And the idea that it makes housing more affordable to me, if I can build 3 units, live in one and rent the other 2, as you just said, it becomes affordable.
Well, it also helps with that idea of building wealth. And you want the owner because it's local and they're going to take care of it. Unlike what you see so much on the Southeast is that these are landlords that are, for one, Javier found out that one of the landlords that owned a significant number of the houses is in New Zealand.
Right.
And they don't even know because it's probably put into a REIT or whatever. And so they, so you don't
sight unseen.
Right.
They're buying, there are people who are buying properties sight unseen. And thankfully we have a really great neighborhood code operation that collaborates with the neighborhoods to really address issues, I guess.
Although the issue though is that if we need to look at like some of the affordability of housing or how housing needs to change. In Fort Wayne, there is the issue of the size of a house that you can build. You can't build a tiny house, even though some of them are so incredible. Or even the issue now that everybody, that we don't have any zoning or policy for is the whole idea of 3D printed walls of houses. It's really incredible. But so I think also we have to think about not just the housing location, but also what determines or defines a house.
Absolutely. And the fact that we're building for people. And as you just said, we have a huge population of boomers. We have an even bigger population of Gen Z. And when you put the millennials together with that, it's gigantic.
What's the second? The baby boomers there were 74 million and there's 70 million millennials. So,
And so when you look at what this next generation, our neighborhoods were planned generations and generations ago. And a lot of that stock is aging out. But there was a lot of wisdom in how we built it. When you can drive down a street and see a small cottage beside a larger home, that was affordability back in the day, right? If I had less money, then I could buy less square footage. Today, we don't do that. We build gluts of housing because we need lots of housing right now, and the tools kind of enhance our ability to do that.
And also I didn't realize how important your zoning issues are.
I was just going to say, from the comprehensive plan to the zoning regulations that go with it, if we aren't thinking about what that next crop of people that are going to inhabit our neighborhoods want, we're going to miss the boat.
But like Chicago, because I lived there at the time when they were taking down Cabrini Green. And they've been very successful in creating these little neighborhoods that are absolutely mixed income. They have townhouses because they found that those large apartment buildings, but they absolutely, just like in where I live in Superior Lofts, we have mixed income tenants. And so they are being more successful that way. So I think that we have to also think about the type of housing, because how are we doing, for housing for those with disabilities? How are we doing with housing for homeless? I wonder how, in the terms of looking at Fort Wayne is doing, because a lot of those things like with disabilities, like CAS, they have a very innovative program, but they're not doing it themselves. Or with the homeless, it's people like Vincent Village. It's a lot of religious organizations that are taking it upon themselves. There isn't, to me, as much of a proactive from the city to do these things.
I think, what I know is the city funds a lot of those organizations, and the city is collaboratively partnering with those organizations out in the neighborhoods. That's what I know for sure when I'm out there. I know that those communications are happening. I know the conversations. Now, from the standpoint of the Southeast strategy that's just getting redone, I look at tools like that, and then I talk to the really spirited, neighbors that are leading the initiative to get it going. It's going to happen. But what I love is when you move it outside of government and the nonprofit sector, which is private, it's just changing how it uses its profit. When they're taking the lead on this, it tells me that the implementation is by the community.
Well, you also talk about how affordable housing or housing, one, it is a community project, and it also drives economic development.
$1,000,000,000%.
How does that work?
Because affordable housing, and I work with the whole spectrum of housing.
Okay.
And so when I talk about housing and I talk about affordability, I like to say what's affordable to you might not be affordable to me.
Right.
But when we talk about workforce housing, which is what we talk about a lot, people then realize, oh, they attach workforce. Oh, working people. Oh, I don't have to worry that they're being lazy. I mean, literally, the things that come into people's minds are key when we're talking about housing. And
well, they think of it as subsidized housing, which is different because
if I get an FHA mortgage, it's subsidized.
Right.
And when I drive down the street, the difference is I can't tell whether my neighbor got an FHA mortgage or a conventional loan.
Right.
And I really don't care. I just care that they maintain their home. Unfortunately, for people who decide to live in affordable housing, all of a sudden you get a stigma attached to you, even though if you just bought a house with an FHA loan, then they wouldn't do the same. They wouldn't do that to you.
Right.
So those are issues, the issues of housing conversations, but actual housing on the streets. When you plan what you want to happen and you see that viable, visible, visionary future, and you've got the legs on the person or the wheels on the bus, that nonprofit becomes key because they can see where things are going. Typically, they've got an engaged board who's driving that bus, and they're connected to the foundations, to the city or the county. They're connected to all the right players to be able to bring that to pass. And the number one partner they're going to need is that developer.
Right. Right. And to get them to see the benefits of doing that. So, but the other issue that I have, and this is sort of my soapbox issue, is this whole idea of cost of housing versus cost of living.
Yeah.
And so one of my issues is that we can't say that there's a low cost of living, because that's what people will say to me when they combine, they say of living in Fort Wayne or Northeast Indiana, they say, oh, you have a lower cost of living. Mm-hmm. But how can it be a lower cost of living when we don't have affordable housing? Mm-hmm. Because in this country today, 11 million renters spend more than 50% of their income on housing. Now, the standard is supposed to be you're supposed to spend 25%, right? Yeah. Or on your housing. Mm-hmm. Okay. But the other problem is that in this country, wages have not kept up with the cost of living, not just in Fort Wayne, but Fort Wayne is part of the country. So you see that. So this is since 1989. Now, 1979. Now it's been adjusted for 1979 inflation. So we have a negative 0.3% median decrease of earning wages, where the median hourly wage in March of 2018 was $22.44. We've had an increase of 53% in housing prices, and the median house in March 2018 cost $337,200. Now, to me, $300,000, just like I was saying when I first came to Fort Wayne and saw the cityscape, and those starting at $300,000, I'm like, that is not affordable. That's not starter housing stock, and I don't know who's going to buy that. Mm-hmm. So I have this big issue that I sort of always feel like everybody has sort of drank this Kool-Aid of thinking that the cost of living is lower here. Mm. There is the sense of cost of housing is that maybe you could buy a house, but there's not enough affordable housing and the rental market. So I don't know if I really believe that that it has a lower cost of living here.
What I know is Fort Wayne's always, at least for as long as I can remember, been perceived as being one of the most affordable markets in the nation. And it's affordable because the values are low. And I mean, when you look at it from that standpoint, then you wonder, okay, let's go back to the glut of extra housing. So we have houses, if we're saying a median value, well, you've got houses sitting out there that are vacant, that aren't worth much,
right,
and no one wants them.
No, and the problem also is what you don't realize also that's about housing is how the houses are appraised. Because if you look at the Southeast Fort Wayne, they appraise it based on the neighbors and also new housing.
Right.
But like in
you haven't had any new housing.
they've had 10 new houses built since 2000.
Right.
So we've got a whole problem there with.
Well, let's take, when we talk about income, it is not a determinant of wealth.
Right.
Wealth, some of the top drivers of wealth, what are they? Owning a home,
right?
Having a retirement savings,
right?
If we go from the conversation that I'm going to rely on an employer to pay me enough money in order to live where I want to live,
right?
And we start looking at, well, what are my other options? Obviously, home ownership. You can build wealth. If I own a home and I have low income, I still own my home. Now my cost of living is very low.
Well, they also say because your mortgage could be $400 versus $600. So then you have that $200 for childcare or other services. So then your children are healthier and things like that. Sure.
Let's own the house outright.
Right.
We don't talk about that. But the other big thing, the big driver in this community that I know is we mostly have we're two-car families.
Right.
So when you have even one vehicle, that's a lot. But when you actually put the additional 15% the cost that comes into your budget because of having vehicles, now all of a sudden you're looking at 45% already right off the bat. And
and then add childcare costs to that.
Right.
Then for some people that takes 30%. So you're in the negative.
Now we go back to wealth. And that says, how am I going to invest in myself? And how am I going to improve my situation by investing in myself and my family and being able to build wealth while the rest of the world figures out this housing issue? Because I'll be honest, I think it takes really tenacious, smart, brilliant, collaborative groups of people to figure this out and to do it well. Right. And I think Fort Wayne's done a great job of it. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done because as Fort Wayne becomes a bigger and bigger market, we're going to need to think about affordable housing.
Right, but we also need to think about increasing people's wages because, and I don't think that this low cost of living is good for us as the residents. It's good for the companies coming here because then they have an excuse to pay us lower wages, but it's still we still have the cost of living in, with inflation and.
Okay, what can I control? I can control going and getting involved in a planning process that allows me to build that granny flat or to put that carriage house on my garage so I can do what? I can rent it out and create another stream of income and let my employer be what they will be.
Now, you also talk about this idea of workers housing. There was a time, and you really saw it like around International Harvester in that neighborhood, that it seemed like, or like Hershey's was the perfect example where Hershey's had housing for their workforce, like around the Hershey plant. But then also you saw that while the International Harvester area now has such difficulty and those houses aren't being maintained and the value is because there's nothing there anymore. Right. There's no reason to live in that area. So you don't have that vitality and that growth. But there was a time that not only did you get your health insurance and everything else from your company, but they also supported or subsidized housing for you.
Well, and I think that's coming back to this day and age. It's just not going to happen that way. It's just not, it's just not going to happen. And I work with a lot of different employers who love their employees. Is the market wage they're paying market wage? Yes, it really is in their cases. And it's a low wage. And so, looking at my conditions as a human being, when you talk about neighborhoods, the people who live in Harvester neighborhood, it pains them to see their neighborhood in a condition like that. Just like, you see it everywhere. Chicago, definitely. The neighborhoods are coming up and going down.
I think, people here, I drive around. I don't know where I am. So I drive around and I think, oh, this is a lovely neighborhood, like Renaissance Point. And, I don't know where I am. And I just think, oh, this is great. Because people don't know what a desolate and decayed neighborhood that, and Chicago still has them. There's one at Altgeld Gardens, which literally looks like bombed out Beirut. There are burnt cars on the corners. So I think that every neighborhood I go to, and I think they're all lovely. I think they're cute little houses. I'm like, oh, you could afford that, but I think that this whole idea of we make it also difficult for blight elimination. So when there is like 2 houses and then there's really a house that's condemned or needs to be torn down, or there's all these empty lots that really either the home next to it could buy and then they could extend their property and increase their value or to build on, but it makes it very difficult to do that type of affordable housing because it's not the economies of scale.
Right.
So I think we have to rethink these programs. And this is a lot of what you do. I mean, now you've taken your 20 years of working for the city and you become an entrepreneur and taken your expertise and you really have created a minority-owned business enterprise. And you talk about this idea of capital stacking.
Yeah.
What is that?
You know, I say I'm a capital stacker because what I like to do is help people. And whether that is to help a community to put together a strategy that needs to be implemented around housing and community development, or on the other side of that, whether that's putting the workforce back in workforce housing by helping employed people figure out ways to build wealth. Capital stacking is just about helping people to build assets and build on those assets that they already have.
And so,
that's a personal asset. That could be a housing type asset.
Right. But you're using that idea of around housing as the optimal sense of building these other aspects of community that would feed off of. So almost like housing is the hub, and then all of these other things become the spokes off of that. So, but you've also not only, I mean, these are also difficult conversations to have, but to get people to start to see the benefits and the solutions. You also have created Midwest Information Exchange.
Yeah.
So that's about giving the tools and information to those who need it most. What is that?
That actually is rolling out in 2021, and it is an information source. So I call it the MIX, the Midwest Information Exchange. But I've spent a lot of time working with Ball State University, Indiana Communities Institute at Ball State University to put together various types of trainings around community development and housing and government type things. And so what I've learned is that this is an ongoing process of learning and bolstering your ability to undertake a project like this. And so the MIX is really designed to help those entities like an EDC or a nonprofit or a government leader who wants to undertake a really complex strategy to get online and get some information. So
it would be almost like if Vincent Village wanted to create this housing and all these, and they needed all these other partners, this could be a starting point for them.
They can just, asynchronous learning.
And then the other problem that they also talk about an issue, which I didn't realize about successful affordable housing or even subsidized housing has to do with the quality of management
and
the management company. It's not necessarily that people think, people who live there, they don't care because they're paying less. No, they care about where they live, but it's the management. And so that you also talk about the idea that when you look at housing and creating these strategies, the importance of leadership.
Absolutely.
So what is the importance of, what makes a good leader in this area? Because you also talk about certain strategies that they need to be able to endure, which is like revenue diversification. And then you also talk about these Trello boards. So what exactly how does leadership play? Because it seems very complicated in the housing arena.
Well, I call it swagger in one word. Swagger to me is going to be 9/10 of the issue a community is going to deal with. And so I spend most of my time coaching high performance community leaders on swagger. Swagger starts with being aware of what you don't know, but then it moves into this idea that once we put a strategy together, we're going to take action. We didn't get into this to have a document to sit on the shelf.
Right.
We actually want to see houses built.
Well, that's also what happened with the first Southeast strategy, that they did implement some things, but the community feels that they didn't necessarily.
Well, there's a big chasm between saying we want to put together a plan and getting it done.
Right.
And frankly, even a great implementation strategy, which says, I've seen communities have a whole table of these are the steps we need to take and here's who's going to do it. Well, who's holding those entities accountable? Because if no one's watching the timeline and no one's holding anyone accountable, and frankly, if you're not putting money into it, it's just not going to happen.
Is that what you talked about, like those community development corporations,
CDC.
that you have to? So are those created by individuals or organizations, or is that something like the cities could do?
The city, you wouldn't want the city to necessarily own it, but yes, it could spin one off. It could help to bring a community together and create one. But a lot of times you've got functional nonprofits like ones we've talked about today. And what they are the strategic business units of community development.
Okay.
So if the community development function within government's job is to understand all of the various winds that are blowing in the dynamics, and even in Fort Wayne's case, bring money to the table to figure out how to prioritize and implement strategies. The CDCs are really your arms and legs. They're the community coming together under a formalized structure to implement.
So would the Bottle Works be an example of okay. And then also, so then would it be create a CDC or an organization like with all of the land that the city has bought, like where the old rescue mission is, or when they buy up something from the legacy. So they bought up where the old rescue mission is on Superior Street. Yeah. So then the next step to develop that would be that they would find different partners.
Yeah, and in communities where I work, and I'm sure that this is what they're doing as well, you're going to figure out what you want to do there, first of all. Right. Swagger comes from knowing what you don't know. Right. Then you go out and you figure out who is going to be the best partner for me. So you might put out a request for qualifications, not necessarily proposals. We're not asking someone to plan the site for us. We're actually asking them to just tell us about your experience and your capital stacking ability, and then invite those folks to the party.
Well, that's sort of like with RTM and their success in redoing American tobacco, and they sort of that's why we chose them. Yeah. But you also, this housing, there's so many complicated components to it, but you don't only look at it from this 30,000 feet view about what the communities could do. You also now, through your entrepreneurial endeavor, are also looking at the sort of ideas of creating programming that helps the individual and also to workforce housing programs. And so you've created this Club 720, which is a app, a website. And what's the significance of Club 720?
Club 720 is a SaaS platform. It's called fintech in the tech world, but it's an app that users can download and get access to matched savings accounts to help them buy a home, fix a home that they live in, buy a car to get to work.
But also, it's also rental assistance, job training, but also it's also part of, it's also part of the mix, right? Because it is giving you funders, nonprofit partners, and governments.
And it sort of brings all of those pieces together. So if I am someone who works for a company here, a lot of times I want to live closer to where I work. Why would I want to live closer? I'm going to have a lower cost of living. Right. I can walk to work. I'm going to be happier. Right. My employer is going to see more engagement. It's all good. So I can download this app. I'm going to get instant access to my credit score. Why is that important? There are 26 million people in the United States who are credit invisible.
Well, because the large majority of Americans do not have bank accounts. People don't understand that.
Well, those are the two top things in Club 720.
And that's also a big issue for those who want to buy a house and build.
That's right. I've got to get on to the ladder.
Because there are lots of programs to help first-time home buyers that are eligible for anybody. They're not, and that's the other thing. Like when you talk about what's affordable and who these services are for, it's not that you have to be 3 rungs down below the poverty level. They have lots of different programs.
We'll be opening one in Fort Wayne in 2021 that will serve individuals earning up to $99,000 a year, 3 to 5% down. Through Club 720, you can apply for it.
And what is the 720? What's the significance of that?
720 credit score is going to get you some of the best financing.
Okay.
And
so the mix is more like
education.
For the education, but also more for the larger corporations and developers.
Actually, there's a wealth building academy on that platform. So folks that are part of Club 720 will be able to take classes on credit awareness, credit visibility, credit excellence,
so you're utilizing the mixed content also, but making it for the consumers.
Yep.
So these the idea is that you're going to create these clubs or sense of community all across the country to help people. And it's not just for minorities. No. It's for anybody who does not have a 720 credit score. And
if you have a 720 credit score, you want to build assets. This is a great tool to help you do that.
Because it's absolutely, you get better rates. You don't, it's there. You get better percentage rates on your credit cards.
I know very wealthy people who have credit scores below 720.
Well, I know a lot of very wealthy people who are in such debt. You wouldn't believe it. I always say, just it looks good on the outside, but let's look at your, and that's why I always say that people, why is it that all these real housewives, these very wealthy, they have everything, and on every invariable show, somebody files for bankruptcy. And then I have issues about for women that why don't these women know what their husbands are doing? So also with Club 720, I think it's also getting for women to also understand building their own credit and not only being tied, to their husband and maybe even if you have to file separate tax returns. I think all those kind of aspects as well.
It's really investing in yourself. You're right.
But it's great that you've really invested all of this talent and work and really are finding significant ways to make a difference on such a large and difficult issue, but also helping, even like someone to buy a house. I mean, I think is really terrific. So it's kudos to you for helping us because it's going to become even a bigger issue. And like I said, I'll need you to come back because we didn't even get to talk about the whole eviction issues and this building wealth. And so I hope you will come back.
Absolutely.
But at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized from a Victorian parlor game. What is your favorite word?
Oh, thank you.
What is your least favorite word?
Hate.
What turns you on creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Learning.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Mean people.
What sound or noise do you love?
Music.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Screaming.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
Goodness. Backpacking.
What profession would you not like to do?
Attorneys.
What do you consider your greatest achievement?
My children.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Mother Teresa.
How would you like to die?
Peacefully.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome.
Well, I want to thank you for taking a seat at the table and just touching the surface with the issue of housing and affordable housing and how there's so many other aspects that are impacted and affected by this issue of housing.
Yeah.
So I think we'll have a feeling we'll get to continue this conversation.
That's great. Thank you.
And I hope you will join me next time when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.